Well, hi and welcome to Influence Faculty. My name is Dr. Nick Lucas, and I have with me on an interview today Liz Weizmann, who is renowned for many things. One of them is a book called Multipliers. And I'll just say good morning to you, Liz. How are you going?
Great, great. Good morning to you. It's Saturday morning for you and Friday for me. So I'm ending the day, you're beginning the day.
Well, we'll see. What a great way to end the week for you then, if it's a Friday. So, look, what I wanted to do was let people know that, again, the reason we do these interviews is I'm fascinated to find out from other people who are influential, like yourself, how you go about being influential in your life. And your key area of study has been around leadership, and that led to the book Multipliers. And I just wonder if you could give us a brief background of your life in terms of how it led you to writing Multipliers, and then what you're actually doing now with your business.
Yeah, sure. I think uh, when I graduated from school, I guess I've always been a good student. And I don't necessarily mean that from, I'm not necessarily the best academic, but I've always loved school, loved learning. After graduate school, I joined this little company called Oracle, and I just landed in this stew of incredibly smart, interesting people, and I just became a student and loved learning from the people around me. I really truly felt like every day was an honor to come to work and just be around people who were so brilliant. And I had days where I'm like, wow, I'm definitely not the smartest one here, and I just might be the dumbest, but I work around smart people, so I'm the luckiest person here. And I guess I felt that way. And so when I started working for this company and I watched all of these really smart people, and I got, put into management really, really young. I was about a year out of graduate school, 24 years old, and I had been teaching as a technical instructor, and they sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, we want you to run our training group. And a month later I got the direction, build Oracle University, and I was 24 years old, and had done nothing like that, and really had no business doing that. But this was an incredible opportunity just to get sort of shoved into management and build this knowledge center and this university for the company. So all that is to say, I got to work around a lot of really smart executives and to study them, and to sort of be a student of leadership. And I was a leader myself, but maybe because I was so junior, I just watched and observed, and I noticed that not all of these really smart executives created smarts and intelligence around them. A lot of them seemed to sort of suck intelligence out of the room. Their need to be smart shut down smarts around them. And other leaders, were also brilliant, but they had a different effect on people. They had this, what I came to call a multiplier effect, that people got smarter and more capable around them. And I watched my colleagues around these different kinds of leaders, and I thought, there's really something up here. And, I left Oracle after 17 years of working there. It was a great experience, and I started doing coaching. I coached a lot of other executives, and I could see again, why is it that sometimes these executives are smart, but no one else gets to be smart? And what we really need are smart organizations, not just smart leaders. And that's what led me to do this study and try to uncover, why is it that some leaders seem to amplify intelligence? I
And
think
so
I
is
was
that
just curious.
is that what you're still doing? You still mostly have a consulting and coaching organization and speaking?
Well, we have a firm called the Weizmann Group, and what we do, kind of simply put, is we help develop the kind of leadership we need to tackle tough problems. And multipliers is a piece of that. How do you lead in a way that you get full access to the intelligence inside your organization? Because our belief is that our toughest problems can be solved by using the intelligence that sits within. And we've spent a lot of time doing that in businesses, and we're now doing that working with schools. And I don't know that this is quite as pronounced in Australia as it is in the US, but this is probably as a nation, the challenge of this decade is how do we rethink and revitalize education? You know, how do we solve problems that the education system wasn't built for? And how do we reinvent that? And the belief is that the intelligence to do that sits inside of our schools. That's not a matter of policymakers and experts, but our educators and our staff know how to solve those problems, and we need leadership that will allow us to do that. So that's what we do. We as a firm, you know, we teach, we consult, we coach, and help organizations build that kind of leadership. For me personally, I spend most of my time researching, writing, speaking, and I do a small amount of executive coaching.
So, and it's all still around this whole area that you've really been in since you first started working then at Oracle. And so, what is it that really keeps you in this? What is it that when you get out of the day and you go into your day that really keeps you passionate and keeps you driving forward?
Well, I think I'm a kind of a curious researcher, and if I'm working on my third book now, which is a totally different topic, and if someone tried to connect all the dots and say, what's the common denominator between what you work on and what you research and write about? The answer is stuff that interests me. Things that are interesting questions that I don't have answers to, that I'm curious about, and I just want to know. And sometimes it takes me years to kind of keep peeling these back and try to figure out what's going on and what's driving the way we lead, and how do we utilize intelligence inside of our organizations. So it's not like I do any kind of market assessment, what are hot topics, what's of interest to the market. For me to pursue something as deeply as I try to pursue them, I have to be really crazy, interested, sort of ferociously hungry to know something. So that's what tends to drive me. It's just a hunger to want to learn about it. And then, once I learn about it, a chance to teach other people what we have found out.
And so in that regard then, what would you say, looking back over your career, that your biggest contribution to this field is?
Well, it's so funny that you asked that, because it was maybe about 6 months after the Multipliers book came out, a colleague just casually said to me, he said, "It must feel really good to have made such a contribution to your profession." And honestly, Nick, it had not occurred to me that I had made a contribution to my profession, and that wasn't really what drove me. What drove me was just this hunger to find out and to share what I had learned. But then I stepped back. I said, I really do feel like that body of work has made a contribution, because essentially what we put out there is a model of leadership that we think is going to help us tackle really, really big, hard problems, and to help the industry and the profession move away from a model of leadership where, the leader's job is to know, to tell, direct, and, shifting to a model where the leader is to access, unleash, to harness intelligence in other people. When I finished up the research, I gave a call to one of my mentors, someone who deeply influenced me, Dr. C.K. Prahalada. He passed a couple years ago, out of the University of Michigan. It's really, really influential business thinker. And I shared with him this research. I was a little nervous. Would it be adequate? Would it be rigorous enough? And CK's response was, Liz, this is such an important idea, because the critical skill of this century is not what you know, it's how quickly you can tap into and access what the people around you know. And, I think it was CK's observation of this work that helped me see that we really are looking at a fundamentally different model of leadership. And last week I had an opportunity to go out to Korea, where just on Monday of this week, South Korea has just inaugurated their first female president. And with President Park's sort of new administration, and their economy has been slow, on a rapid growth curve, slowing a little bit. They're stepping back to look at what the agenda for this administration should be, and what does South Korea need to do to continue to grow and be vibrant. And they asked me to come out and join them in this conference they called New Leadership Great Korea, because they're grappling with what kind of leadership do we need in the future, and this very hierarchical culture is trying to understand, how do we move away from this notion that, the leader sits at the top of the pyramid and they're to be revered and respected and never questioned. And to see these, it was a conference of the top CEOs across Korea, to see these CEOs trying to understand what kind of leadership do they need to grow, what kind of leadership do they need for this new generation of young people who expect very, very different models of leadership. And so it's fun to be able to contribute to that and to help a nation shape its political and business and leadership agenda. So it's been fun to see the ideas kind of spread to different parts of the world.
Well, talking about spread then, because spread happens is another way to say word of mouth, and also you growing in recognition around your expertise here. So, I mean, when people come to you and they ask for your advice or ask you to be involved, as in the conference you've just described, why is it? What are people talking about you? What are they saying, gossiping about you? What's the word of mouth on Liz Wiseman, and why you would be the kind of person that would be able to help them?
Well, I don't know what the word of mouth was in Korea. I have to say, honestly, what they expected of me and my expertise was not really what I felt like I could deliver. I went over there and they're asking me to contribute, what should the administration, the new government's agenda be for creating social welfare and balancing economic growth versus social welfare. And I kept saying, this is so far out of my area of expertise. I really study leadership. I study it in business and in education. And, so I was asked to comment on what's going on in North Korea and economic development in North Korea. So that was a little outside my area of expertise. But, I think people look to me because I have deeply studied leadership and intelligence, and, it's probably one of the pivotal issues of our time as we're moving into more of a knowledge industry. So, I think there's something in the research and the content, but I think there's also something in the energy. Maybe it's best said, I just was up at Zynga a couple days ago. Zynga's a big game internet company, and a really interesting, successful company. And when they were introducing me, they said something like, "We like Liz's content and we like her energy." And I think maybe that's it. I think, kind of to your question of, if you ask me why have I been influential, is maybe because I'm willing to sort of tell it like it is, but in a way that's fun and funny and easy. The very first executive that I coached, and we were working on kind of what his strengths were, his native genius, and just that thing he does easily and freely. And we got done with this process, and he said, "Liz, I know what your genius is. What's that thing you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, do tell." And he goes, "You have this ability to tell people the truth, but do it in a way that they can hear it." And I think that is something that has allowed me to be influential, is being a truth teller and being direct, but also, I don't know if it's gentle or, in a way that it's just easy to learn, easy to absorb. I don't know, making sometimes the hard news easy to hear.
Well, I mean, this would be a trait of a multiplier, correct, as well?
Well, maybe, but I have as many, I have as many natural traits of diminishers. I just have to fight them off. But, if someone says, well, Liz, are you more of a multiplier or a diminisher? Being the opposite of these leaders who sort of, amplify intelligence. My response is it takes one to know one. I think I'm enough of a multiplier that I could see this dynamic, and I could put a name to it because I could see these leaders who had this effect, and I think I had enough of it in me that I could recognize it and knew what to ask for and to study it and describe it. But I've got enough diminisher in me as well. I've got enough of a micromanaging, rapid responding, know-it-all, that I have to watch for this. I have to be careful. The path of least resistance for many people, and certainly for me, is to end up having a diminishing impact, sometimes without even knowing it. So I think it kind of takes one to know one there too. And I can recognize how easy it is to have a diminishing impact because I've been there. I've spent years managing large teams and large organizations, and I know I can recognize the bait. And I've taken it too many times myself.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing there, you just using those terms and you being able to recognize those two categories is the simplicity of that as well. Because I've looked at a lot of different models in influence, in behavior change, and when you read the academic journals, often the models are complex. And one of the things that appealed so much to me when I first heard you present this and when I read your book was, even though I like detail, and I think we all have an ego around how much detail we can handle sometimes, I really, really appreciated the simplicity of it, so much so that, as you know, my son, who was, I think he was about 7 at the time, he asked me what I was reading, and I explained it to him, and he immediately recognized that his soccer coach had the characteristics of a multiplier, and that the stand-in coach he'd had on the weekend had the characteristics of a diminisher. So it was a concept that was incredibly easy for him to grasp, and to be honest, for the last few years, he has consistently used those terms around his own behavior and around seeing behavior in other people as well. So that's for me, the beauty of it is it's simple enough yet profound enough to really have a difference, because people of all ages can get an idea of it. And I guess that leads me to my question then. This new book that you're bringing out is a book that's aimed at more at education. Can you tell us a bit about that, and again why you think it's so important, or been important enough for you to lend your mind and energy to it over the last few years for education?
Well, sure. And it is what I strive to do is take a simple idea and not overcomplicate it. And to that point, when I was writing the book, my publisher, Hollis Heimbach at Harper, she said, "Now, Liz, write me a simple book. Like, don't fancy it up. Don't fancy up the vocabulary. Don't, use simple words and just keep it simple." And I'm writing notes to myself. I'm like, good, because I don't actually know any fancy words. Like, I didn't have to dumb down this. I just tried to describe the dynamic, and that, I think, is what we have seen, is the ideas do resonate. And it did not surprise me that the ideas resonated in business and technology. I come out of the tech world here in Silicon Valley. What we found is that the ideas have resonated in places, in industries, in companies, and parts of the world that have 4 common factors. I think it was probably sitting on an airplane one day as I was wondering, why am I coming back from the Middle East, and why am I teaching at the Naval Academy? I know nothing about the military. Why am I being asked to go in and teach in places where I know nothing? And I realized that the ideas probably have their biggest impact in places where there's, one, a growth agenda, either trying to manage growth or return to growth, where 2, there's a resource shortage, either born out of austere times economically, or a resource shortage derived from a talent shortage. Like, we just don't have people with this skill around the world. The 3rd is where there's kind of an emerging sense that the current models of leadership are not working. They're not sufficient. And then lastly, quite often where there's a growth agenda, where there's an innovation agenda. And so you look at these things, And we find it's relevant in the military. It's relevant in South Korea. It's relevant in the Middle East. It's relevant with tech companies, but maybe it's relevant in healthcare, where we're dealing with, some of our biggest challenges is, how do we keep doing more with fewer resources? And where these things really come together hard is in education, where the need for rethinking and reforming and transforming and revolutionizing and creating a modern education system, but yet budgets are shrinking. How do we do this? And it leaves educational leaders in this terrible pickle. How do I do more with less? And the ideas had just resonated and sort of taken off there, and a publisher that specializes in education books came to me and asked if I would write a version of multipliers for educators. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, but I don't have time. I'm working on another business research topic that I'm crazy interested in. It's super high on that obsessive curiosity factor for me. I couldn't possibly put that aside. And I thought, well, this might be actually the most important application of these ideas. And of course, I think of young people like your son. I was so touched when I saw his blog, and just him so clearly understanding what it's like to be led by a multiplier, and what it's like to have a soccer coach around whom you don't play at your best, and versus James, his coach. And then I thought, well, I probably should do this, but I still don't have the time. And the publisher said, well, we could find a ghostwriter for you. We could find a research assistant. We could find people who understand education really well, who can help you. And I thought, well, I actually know someone who understands education really well, who could help. And that's my mom. My mom was a former special ed teacher, former assistant principal of an elementary and a middle school. And so I phoned up my mom, as publisher wants me to write a book, will you write this with me? And she said, oh dear, of course I'll help you with that. And she helped me copy edit the first book, treating it as if it was like, I don't know, a high school term paper or something. And she was just, helping her daughter find mistakes and fix them. And she said, I'll help you. Sure, dear. And I'm like, no, Mom, not like that, not help. I'm asking if you'll co-author this with me. And she, she had to think about it for a little while, and she decided to jump in and do it. So I got to write this book with my mom, which was thrilling, a total honor, as well as Elise Foster, another colleague who comes out of the education world, who jumped in with us and became a second daughter to my mother in this kind of incredible mother-daughter project.
That was unexpected, because it, as you said, it seems like you were on another direction, and you were persuaded to come back and do this, and it's led to what seems like it's going to be a wonderful outcome. Are you happy with the book?
We're thrilled with the book. We set sort of a challenge. We try really hard in our little firm to practice the multiplier practices. So when we jumped in, it was very easy to just say, okay, let's take the old book and let's throw a few education examples in and call it done. And we set a goal for ourselves as what would we need to do to make this book better than the original for educators. And I think we've done that. And I think it was my mother, Lois, who, when we got done, she said, Elizabeth, I think not only is this a better book for educators, it just might be a better book, because multipliers came out, I don't know, almost 3 years ago, and we've learned a lot, and we've learned a lot of nuance since then, and we've learned how to help people really lead differently. And so the new book, it's like all full of resources and tools. As I was just trying, how do I simplify this? How do I make it really easy for someone to not only read this book, but to just do something the next day and right away? And so it was a simplify, make it compelling and easy to just take a step. So I think it's good. And ironically, I was so excited about all the new goodies in this book for educators that I called up the publisher for the first book and said, hey, let's do a second edition. I've got all these new tools and resources, and why don't I go back and sort of rewrite the first and put that all in there? And my very, very savvy publisher said, we'll do that when you finish the other business book you're working on. Like, give us that first. So the other book's being extorted out of me,
Right.
of course, with total delight. But
So tell me then, with the book, I've been tempted myself at times with various teachers that my kids have had to give them the book, because the ulterior motive here is to hopefully that they'll read it and recognise in themselves, tendencies that they have in both directions, multiplier and diminisher, and this idea that, hang on, if I give them the book, hopefully they'll change. What's your perspective? What kind of feedback have you had from people who have said to you, you know what, I read the book, I was a diminisher, and as a result of the book, I actually have changed, and I'm noticing a change in what I'm doing? I mean, that's a broad question across all the different industries, but in education, what's the feedback there from teachers, and whether you're creating an actual change in them?
well, I think so. We are seeing educators, maybe even more so than business leaders, take these ideas and run with it. And I think the reason why is because they're so native to educators. And I think what happens is, education attracts a certain type of person. And, maybe in short, it's people who take pleasure and find joy in the development and learning of others. It naturally just puts them on the path of being a multiplier. And any great educator teaches like a multiplier. And, they're using their own knowledge and intelligence to sort of ignite a passion of learning and spark intelligence and capability in others. We do it naturally in our role as teachers, but I think what happens is when teachers go into administration, they forget and they think, okay, well, this is a different role, so it requires a different skill set. And so they kind of put on some leadership cloak, some administrative cloak, and they forget what made them great. And for a lot of leaders, educational leaders who have read multipliers, I think it's just a return to what they already know to be true. And that seeing the people they lead in their schools the same way they saw their students actually makes them a really brilliant leader. So we've seen a lot of leaders just very quickly shift their assumptions, shift practices. We've seen leaders, certainly in the US, but in England, Chile, find something that they can do that has really changed the way they lead. Here's what the book doesn't do. It doesn't change other people. And, I get this a lot. People are like, I read your book and I work for, one of the great diminishers of all time. How do I change him? How do I change her? Like, can I just give them the book and will that do it? And I think it's a big unequivocal no, it won't. Don't waste your money. Don't buy the book. Don't even slip it under their door. And, I've just seen too many people try to change someone else. And it doesn't go anywhere. In fact, there was a company, and I got contacted by a number of people in the company saying, oh, our boss is just one of these diminishers that you wrote about, help us. And their boss was actually someone that I knew from, sort of a previous career. And, they talked me into coming down and spending some time. And they said, okay, we'll read the book. Our boss will read the book. Everyone read the book. And they had this image that I was going to come down, sit around a table with them for an hour or so. We would talk about it, and that their boss would have this epiphany. Wow, I am one of these diminishers. I've been leading wrong. And so I watched their faces as they just waited for this to happen. And you can imagine it just never happened. In fact, quite the opposite happened at the end of the meeting. As he's walking me out, he's like, oh, Liz, that was so great. I love your book. I just love these ideas. I am such a multiplier. And it actually created the opposite kind of impact. They're like, oh, this book is about me,
Yeah.
And so I just, I caution all of us that we don't really have the right to change the way someone else leads. Organizations where we've seen a big packet, and your focus here is influence, where I've been the most influential is where I focused on um, helping people see how they could improve as a leader rather than trying to improve their bosses or their colleagues. I have not been that influential in that. In fact, I feel like I've fallen on my face a couple times when I've been tempted to do that.
Well, I
The
think
real influence is
it's
changing our own approach to leadership.
look, I 100% agree with that, because so much of what's written about influence is how to persuade and influence other people, and of course they're great skills to develop, and everyone can learn to maximize those. It doesn't always mean that you have mind control and that you're actually going to be successful in changing someone else's behavior. And I think you're absolutely right that being able to influence ourselves is one of the most important things that we focus on here. So, I mean, how do you, the behaviors that people have that are diminishing, how do people go about making those changes to themselves? When you talk about that in your own life, then how have you gone about identifying what your diminishing traits are? What techniques or skills or structures have you put in place that actually help you to limit those behaviors and focus on the multiplier behaviors?
Well, I think, and that, when I said the second book is better than the first in some ways, one of the reasons why is because I've learned to see the subtleties. When I started, I'm sort of studying multipliers, diminishers, as if they're these polar opposites, like, somehow like it's Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, and where I have, I think, had the most influence is seeing the space in between, where many of us are accidental diminishers. And I think for me and for others, it's seeing that sometimes we do our greatest damage with the best of intentions. And for me, as I'm a founder, president, owner of a research and consulting firm. I'm a mom to 4 kids. I have a number of roles where I have to lead, in addition to my own work, writing and teaching. And I've learned to see the subtext that where I end up shutting people down despite the very best of intentions. And, what I've learned to do is see where we tend to accidentally diminish. For me, I'm an idea guy. I'm like, whoo, what about this? What about this? I'm constantly like throwing out ideas. And I find, in some ways it overwhelms people and they shut down. And I've learned to find these workarounds. So all these little ideas, I've learned to create a holding tank so I don't overwhelm my team, my children with, oh, well, what about this? And how about this? And, ooh, look, you could do this. And I've learned to hold back. And there's, on your subject of interest of influence, there's something a woman named Carol Wasilician, which is a phenomenal executive coach on the East Coast, said. She's the one who helped me see this with regard to multipliers, but I think it's so true. She said the best coaches know when it's time to be big and when it's time to be small. And I think the same is true with leaders. The best leaders, and certainly the multipliers we studied, know when it's time to be big with an idea, a challenge, a question, and when it's time to sort of retreat and be small and be quiet and hold back and create room for other people. And I think this is really important when understanding influence. That when, as a coach, a thought leader, an executive in a corporation, a parent, a teacher, when you're always on, everyone else has to be always off. And when you're always on, people tune you out. There's the little Charlie Brown cartoons, there's a voice of the teacher, and in these little cartoons. In fact, I don't know, Nick, do you know this little voice that this teacher does?
No, I don't actually.
Okay. It's, wah, 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 and so the teachers
Yeah.
in these cartoons, it's like speaking into some microphone. And for years, I kid you not, I always wondered, why do they have like a robot for a teacher? Why does a teacher talk this way? I didn't realize that Charles Schulz was telling this, was letting the viewer of these cartoons see what it's like for children to hear their teacher. And it's how, it's how I sometimes sound to my kids. Certainly how I sound to my husband, like blah, 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 blah. So sometimes when we're more quiet, we hold back, we're small, we're more influential. Because when we do say something, people, oh, interesting. They pay attention.
Well, people are very much aware of other people who are trying to persuade them, and often there's that reciprocal pushback. You're trying to change me, and I'm going to push back and resist that change for no other reason other than you're trying to change me, irrespective of the wisdom of the change. I mean, the impact of this really, if we talk on an individual, personal level, you've got all these people in the workforce, and you've got people in their own businesses as well. Students going through, and they're all, we talk about people as a population, but each of them are individuals with thoughts, feelings, ambitions, talents, and all sorts of things to explore. And our interaction with other people can have such a positive or negative impact on that, often more than we even realise. And I did an interview recently with a clinical psychologist, Dr. Ken Christian, and he'd written a book called Your Own Worst Enemy, How to Avoid Adult Underachievement. And I wonder then, because there is, according to him, and he was telling me, there's research on underachievement, and there's a whole group of people who are going through adulthood who are underachieving. They're not tapping into their greatness, if you want to call it that. And not to blame diminishers, because people are ultimately responsible. But again, we're just not aware sometimes of the impact that other people are having on us. So when I was interviewing him, and I had this one coming up with you, I really saw the two ends of the spectrum there, where you've got the leaders who are diminishing or multiplying, and they include parents who diminish and multiply, and the people who are, to some extent, the result of that. And you get to work with people on a one-on-one basis, and these things actually do have very deep meaning for people in their lives and the quality of their life. And I saw the two marry there, because what you want to do is help people not be underachievers. And I guess that's the whole point there of the multiplier, and going for that approach isn't just to necessarily flog someone to death so that you can get the most out of them and multiply the outcome. It's the focus really is to help them. Would it be safe to say help them overachieve compared to what they thought they were capable of?
Well, you could. I think the achievement word is a dangerous word. Maybe because I'm a little bit prone to overachievement, that I think, and I have 4 children, and one of them, who will remain unnamed here, is probably more prone to achievement than the others. And I see how, we'll be gender neutral, this child can get twisted up with this drive to achieve. So I don't know that driving ourselves to achieve is the lens that I would look at it through. The lens that we are looking at this through is, how do you do your best work? And yeah, multipliers, what essentially they're doing is they're enabling people to do their best work, using their full intelligence and contributing at their fullest. But it's, to your point and to your colleague's point, it's a two-way street. I looked at it through the lens of leadership, but after digging in there, again, why the second book, we feel like we've learned so much more, is, well, what's the reciprocal contribution of the employee? What do they need to do to contribute their best? So let's just take an example. One of the disciplines of the multiplier is they're a talent magnet. And the reason why people are attracted to work with them is because they find people's native genius, the thing they do easily and freely, and they utilize it. So for me, like, my native genius, probably my strongest native genius would be that I take complex things and I simplify them. I do it all the time. I do it everywhere. I do it sort of compulsively, obsessively. Now, I could sit around and wait for some Prince Charming manager to come along and say, gee, Liz, I've noticed that you're really good at synthesis, and boy, there's this thing, and boy, we could use someone who could go through the data and the research and listen to people and synthesize it and pop out, here's 1 or 2 things that we need to do. that might take a year, 2 years, maybe a whole career. If I'm unlucky, maybe never. But I don't need to wait for Prince Charming to come along and discover that. I can figure that out for myself, and I can say, if I work for you, Nick, you know what? I'm pretty good at synthesizing things. You know, that client project we're doing, why don't you let me, facilitate that meeting and help bring us to closure? Or why don't you let me go through these reports and help us come up with our top 3 trends? That you can offer proactively your genius and essentially give people kind of a user's manual to you. Here's how to use me at my fullest. And so I think there is a lot that sits with each of us that we can do to help ourselves achieve or do our best work, and not underachieve because of our environment, our culture, our management, the fact that you don't like the person in the cube next to you.
So, given that you've explored it so deeply, and I actually can't wait to see a copy of the new book. When is it actually going to be published?
It's the 19th of March, and I will send one to you because, and I'm sending it to you, Nick, but I'm really sending it to your son.
Very good.
I was so delighted by his sweet blog about what it means to be a multiplier and a diminisher, and as I think I've told you, it prompted me to go ask other kids his age, what does it mean to be a multiplier? And it was so beautiful to watch how well they understood. And I think it taught me something, ironically, that I probably already know, is that the way to really be influential in teaching. I'm a teacher. That's what I do. I research, I write, but it's all for the purpose of teaching leaders how to really utilize people and talent. And when you're at your best teaching, you're there helping people learn what they already know and helping people discover something that they already know to be true, because that's really that's the only way to make sustained change or self-development, is when you discover something about yourself you already know, and the teacher has helped you to figure that out. So your son helped me discover what I already knew.
Well, he'll be absolutely chuffed, and every time I mention your book or your name, he always gets a big smile on his face. And so it's the impact that you can have on a one-to-one basis. Again, one of the things with the internet, we talk about influence, and we talk about large groups of people, and we forget that they're all individuals, and all the little touch points we have with people, whether they're big or small, young or old, can have such a positive influence on their lives. And definitely being involved with you and your work has had that through my family. I've seen that, and just something too it caused me to reflect on there. When I was an academic teaching at university, I taught in a lot of musculoskeletal pain medicine sort of thing, and there's a lot of detail there to teach. And so I was the lecturer, and I had all this information, and I did consume information, a lot of it. I'd read research papers all the time, so I was always up to date with what the latest thing was. And what I do now is try not to teach anything at all, and try to base all my presentations with questions, just to find out what people know, and then to find out, if they don't know it, if I can use questions again to help them actually discover the answer for themselves. And it's a complete 180. Rather than thinking I'm the founder of all knowledge and have to teach people this information, the universities put them at my feet to teach them, and I have to do it. It's just a completely refreshing way to look at it. I feel less exhausted when I run sessions like this, because I'm not having to be the encyclopedia. And two, the people are so much more involved and active as a result of asking questions. And truth be told, one of the key things that set me off on this was your anecdote when I heard you present in Fiji when we were there together, about how someone had advised you when you got home in the evening with your children to spend the whole evening just asking questions instead of trying to organise them to get off to bed and do their homework and all that sort of thing. And the whole art of asking questions and seeing the incredible result it can have when you frame everything that way, it has been quite revolutionary for me, and as part of now what I actually do. So, how have you seen that work out with what you do?
Well, it was profound for me. Profound. So when Brian, my colleague, said, Liz, why don't you just go home? Liz, bossy mom who's just, barking orders, get your bum in bed, brush your teeth, put that away, leave her alone. And he gave me this little subtle challenge. And it wasn't an overt, Liz, go do this thing. It was just an observation, Wonder what would happen if you just talked to them in the form of questions. I think I'm the one who probably turned it into like a, big obsessive, I can do that, that'll be interesting. Challenge. It just was so profound that when I asked the questions and just kind of the nature of the challenge, we talked about this before, Nick, is it wasn't ask more questions, it was only ask questions. Can you go home tonight and speak to your children only in the form of questions? Everything ends in a question mark. It was such a fun, curious challenge for me. And I did it. And I ended up keeping it up for 3 nights because what was happening in my home was so profound as I realized my kids didn't need me telling them how to get into bed. They knew the routine. They knew what they needed to do. They knew how to do a lot of things. And there was this incredible shift in my home. But I think the shift really was in me, realizing that I was choosing to take a very low value role inside my home, where for me, leadership matters more than anywhere. I hope it does for everyone. The leadership that we demonstrate in our homes is where I think we'll do our very greatest acts of leadership, and probably, our greatest service to our communities is to get leadership right in our home. Like, what would happen if everyone could get that role right where they were at their best? I think we'd probably have fewer diminishers in the workplace as a result of that. But, I was just barking orders, directing traffic. And instead, when I play the role asking questions, it shifts the burden of thinking to my children. And it shifts accountability and ownership. And it's a fun exercise to just go extreme once. And then, you can conjure that up anytime you need to, whether it's teaching a class and, whether it's leading a meeting. But I find I still, I don't stay always in the form of questions, as is obvious, but I tend to go there in times of extreme, when things are extremely good. And, like maybe one of my staff members in our firm has just come back and had a really successful workshop. That's my signal, Liz. Hold back and just ask about that experience. What happened? What was interesting? What did they... And then let that person kind of be big in that moment. I also do it when things have gone extremely wrong. Like not too recently when we left our 12-year-old son, 13-year-old son in charge of his 8-year-old brother on his very first babysitting assignment, his first foray into babysitting, and we were gone about an hour. My last words for him, or sort of my only words, were, stay with your brother, stay with your younger brother. And about an hour later, we get a call from the local police in our town, the Menlo Park Police, saying, we have your sons here in police custody. Could you come pick them up? How did that happen?
An hour.
It was an hour. We had ordered our dinner, it hadn't even arrived yet, and the police are calling to say that they have our sons. My 8-year-old, is in police custody. And of course, we're full of, and it was a great chance to just sit back and ask. I only had to ask 2 questions. Really, I think only had to ask 1 question. And that was all it took to just kind of troubleshoot that little situation. And they were fine. They didn't find themselves into too much trouble.
Right. So, look, I just wanted to wrap this up, but I did want to give you one last opportunity, because you mentioned that you are passionate about this other thing, the book that you're working on, the other business book. Are you able to give us a hint about what that is and what the time frame you think is for that?
Well, I can. What I'm studying experience, and when does experience matter? And more interesting to me is, when is being inexperienced, a novice, a newbie, a rookie, when is that more valuable than experience and knowledge? And I'm finding it's tremendously valuable, and in some ways experience isn't relevant and doesn't matter, and how do we maintain sort of a perpetual rookie mindset and rookie state. To me, it's really, really fascinating. How do you stay on a path of agility and really rapid cycle learning? So I'm having tons of fun with it. And hopefully it'll find its way into a book in about a year.
In about a year. Okay, all right. Well, we'll have to touch base again because I'm sure it'll be fantastic. So, look, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time to share all that with us today. And I wish you all the best with the book that's coming out very shortly to do with education, and the new one that's coming out in a year.
Thanks. Good talking to you. I'm a big fan of Harley, your son. So tell him I'm sending a book off to him, and I just appreciate him teaching. I love to share his blog with people.
Will do.
Nick, thank you.